Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 35,573 people from 160 countries and is supported by 495 organisations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 53 country contacts engaged in defending women's rights. Please do join us as a volunteer activist. Today, I'm really pleased to say we have Leslie Sudock from the USA, and the title of her talk is Speaking Freely on and Off the Street. After Leslie, we have Suzanne Vierling from USA, and her talk is called The Impact of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on Warfare on Womanhood. And the third talk we have is Sheila Jeffries from the UK, the 8th of March Principles 2023, a Charter of Men's Sexual Rights. We're going to now go to our first speaker, who's Leslie. So it's Leslie Sudock from the USA. She was raised in the early years of American feminism in the mid-1970s. She's a wife, 40 plus years, a mother of 2 sons and 2 small grandsons. Leslie's professional training and work has been in the fields of philosophy, law, and historical musicology, and lately art. She's worked as a legal services attorney for the homeless, as a criminal prosecutor, advocating in cases of violence against women and children, appeals court clerk, and court-appointed judge advocate. Leslie spent decades as a semi-professional classical singer and as a fibre artist and community art teacher and leader, with special interest in art as a personal and political expression. So the title of Leslie's talk is Speaking Freely on and Off the Street. And thank you so much for doing this, Leslie. Over to you.
I don't usually talk about my work, I just make it. I'm a doer. And I rarely talk about making art except when I'm teaching someone how to do something. But I thought today, since I usually wear 2 hats, sometimes as an attorney and sometimes as an art teacher or an artist, that I would take the opportunity to share how I think it's possible for us to be effective political artists as speakers, and to do it and to share my thoughts about how to do it persuasively. Most of the work I've ever done has been, until recently, has been through needlework. It's what I was raised with. I'm a woman of a certain age, and that's how I started. It's what I did. I want to just acknowledge the 3 women that I credit with teaching me how to make art in community. So on the left is my grandmother. That's my grandmother in front. That's a film, an image from maybe 1961, 62. That'll be me in the very far left corner, that little girl looking out. That's my family. It's a Jewish holiday dinner in New York. And my grandmother was a community artist. She was, she crocheted, I can't even tell you how many blankets for Jewish refugees after World War II. She was very active, and she taught me how to knit, crochet, and sew, probably all before I was, or by the time I was about 6 years of age. And I learned a lot on my grandmother's lap. In the middle is an image of my friend Catherine Panapacker. She's the tall blonde woman in the middle. And Catherine's a Philadelphia artist, extraordinary artist, a community activist. And if anybody taught me about the power of art as a social practice and a political practice, it would be Catherine Panapacker. I credit her with everything. On the right is my weaving sensei, Miso Jo. I lead a community art studio, a Japanese weaving studio. I learned about this philosophy from Miso Sensei and her community in Osaka, and I wouldn't be able to do this presentation without Miso Jo. That work has enabled me to frame what I teach in helpful ways, I think. At least I'm hoping so. I'm a bookish person, so you can't get away. I can't get away without sharing some books. I have 4 basic principles for how to make art in the community. This is what motivates me, and so I'm sharing it. I happen to be a very spiritual person. A lot of us are. My motivation comes from exposure to, at about the age of 14, from Martin Buber's work, I and Thou. So it's a basic tenet of what I do. I try to apply it with respect to everyone, no matter whether I like them, whether I don't, whether I agree with them, whether I don't. Treating people as thous. I'm an atheist, but treating people as thous is a good way to live in the world. The next, number 2, it just describes how we are we are art making animals. And this has been studied. I came across Ellen Dissanayake's work when I was in grad school recently. It's terrific work. Her books are just lovely. And if you want to get a sense of, a lot of it's women's art, if you want to get a sense of what kind of animals we are as art making animals, I recommend her work. My philosophy studies included a very healthy dose of phenomenology and investigation into how we experience things, how we describe what we experience. John Dewey's work and Martin Heidegger's work are really critical to how I think about making art in the world. In fact, that's how I think about most things in the world, direct experience and processing it in certain ways. Martin Heidegger's book is ridiculously impenetrable, but I had to read it when I was in grad school. And he had a central distinction that I want to share, which is the difference is with respect to art. The difference between things that are ready to hand and present to hand. And in art terms or in practical terms, it's the difference between a hammer that functions and a hammer that's broken in pieces. We have an emotional or ethical relationship to the things that we can use at the ends of our hands, and we don't to other stuff. And in a way, it's like saying I and thou to the material world. Some things are thous for us, and some things are not. They're utilitarian. And so this has informed everything I do. I've named my studio for it. My studio is called Ready to Hand. So that's Heidegger. And the last will relate to the work I do, and you'll see it in a few minutes. Yi-Fu Tuan's book, if you want to read anything about what it means to be located in the world, I mean, physically located in the world, especially in a place, I would recommend that. It's an extraordinary little book. And then I'll preface everything that's coming by saying most of the artwork I've made in the last 25 years or so, or 20 years, has been about issues relating to Israel-Palestine. I'm an activist against occupation. I have been since I'm a teenager. And so Benveniste's book was very helpful to me in getting me going to make art. And you'll see examples of that. They're coming very quickly. Here's how I frame what we're doing when we make art. I'm speaking about how to do it fluidly, how to do it without impediment, how to do it freely. That's what I mean when I say speak freely with art. It's a simple matter. It's what I teach. It's what I learned to teach from my Japanese teachers. And I'm hoping it'll be useful. I think it's applicable. In Japan, they think it's a peace movement. They think that we take this out into the world. That's why I'm here, taking it to you. To do this, you can't speak through art if you don't know how to do something. So you've got to meet your medium, meet a technique. That's the first thing. I don't usually rehearse what I write in PowerPoint, so I'm only going to do it now. You need to develop skill. I'm going to call it vocabulary, okay, which requires practice and experimentation. There's no way to make art and to become fluent if you don't actually do some of it and do a little bit more and do a little bit more difficult. It's a lot like learning language. To gain fluency, I think even more is required. When I mean fluency, I mean really doing it freely. And to do that, at some point, you need to start thinking intentionally. You need to plan some exercises. You need to maybe take a workshop. Whatever it is, you need to have a focus about developing vocabulary. Maybe try poetry, maybe whatever it is in language. But that's the process. The last thing, have a good idea, but compose and execute. and fail. I've included examples of my failures in this presentation so you can see me fail. I'm perfectly happy to show you how I fail. That's it for a quick presentation on how you do it, how to speak freely. Off the street is just private speech, making art on your own, even sharing it. I don't mean legal public speech. Hopefully I'll get to that at the end of this presentation. Here's an example of what I've just said. I said, I'm a knitter. I've knitted, I can't even tell you how many hats, mittens, gloves, socks, and so on. I know how to knit. I know how to knit a hat. I took it, developed it, acquired new skills, knit a pair of very, very beautiful mitts, okay? And then applied it in a very interesting way. I participated in a peace flag project. It was an international project, women's organization. I claimed, for personal reasons, I claimed Burma, Cambodia's flag. I also claimed Palestine, you'll see it in a minute, and applied everything I knew to a new topic. It's just a straightforward application of what I've just shown you in the list. Here's again, a little more humorous, a little serious, other ways of using, there are a lot of knitters here, so I thought I would address this. Using knitting to speak politically. These are simple applications, not particularly sophisticated. Stitch for Senate, those of us who were opposed to the Iraq War, gathered together, and it was another person's project. And I made the Senate cap. These are military helmets. I made the one for my state's, one of my state senators. It's a straightforward project. It was sent to all the senators. It was effective. It was in the news. Obama, man, a lot of us were very glad to have the opportunity to elect an Afro-American president. And I worked on his campaign, like a lot of people. There was a lot of opposition within the Jewish community to Obama. I didn't share their views. So I made some designs. I was an experienced knitter as a teacher. So I made some designs and some items that would help the campaign. Some of them were auction items. Some of them were patterns that they were able to distribute so that everybody around the country, anyone who wanted to knit, to wear their political views were able to do so. And I created the patterns. They were online. They were circulated widely. This is another example. Speaking freely is gaining skill and applying it in a simple way. Speaking persuasively, like in a sophisticated way, in a particularly effective way, and takes a little bit more. And what I think it takes is a commitment, is a different level of commitment. It takes a commitment to your subject, and I mean a personal commitment. I think as an artist, we're most effective when we're seriously, personally committed. It takes commitment to your audience. You have to know your audience, who you're really speaking to. And this is something that I think we ought to discuss. We could discuss in this community more who it is that we really want to talk to when we're talking, especially on the street. I'm not quite sure that we know that all the time, or that all of us do. Medium and materials. The best art is often art that explores its materials or techniques. And I'll show you some examples of that. And again, compose well, have a really good idea, and then get your materials to meet it, execute it well. That's seriously persuasive. I hope that a couple of things that I show you in a few minutes, you'll say those are persuasive and you'll understand what I mean. I'm just going to detour and explain commitment, okay? This is my family. This is all we know about that portion of my family. It's my dad's family. And I was given this at the age of 13. It's the only thing that my grandfather had. We know even less about my mother's family. Okay, they came to this country as Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms, like a lot of people. The reason I mention it is this. I was as a child of the 50s and 60s in New York area, I was indoctrinated into American Zionism. So the art you're going to see is about that, and I'm explaining my commitment. Okay, the baby is my grandfather. The older adolescent boy on the right, behind my bearded great grandfather, was his older brother. That's my Uncle Charlie. He brought everybody to this country, the women. He brought his mother and his siblings. They're the only ones that came eventually, beginning of the 20th century. Charlie became a very prominent Jewish cantor in the synagogue system. He was very well, he was nationally known. This is the family that produces artists and musicians. It spits out a singer in most generations. I happen to be one of them. He was what's called conservadox in American Jewish speak, which means he insisted that everyone toe the line religiously. And the family was, I was raised in a Zionist family, let's put it that way. I made that when I was 17, by the way. It's the only thing I have of my art when I was 17. I don't even remember making it, to be honest. Okay. American Zionism 101. Most people, most Jewish Americans don't talk about this. I do. Okay. This is a quick snapshot of how to make an American Zionist. The art that follows speaks to these issues. Okay. The first thing is holidays. This is the picture of the Western Wall in Jerusalem. It's a symbol. We all know it's a symbol. The Jewish National Fund is how, frankly, it's how Palestine was erased. It was covered over. I received a certificate from my grandmother every birthday and Hanukkah. She planted a tree in Israel in my name year after year. It's a very powerful way of teaching children. It's a little Torah scroll, Jewish Bible scroll. All of us, if we start religious school, are given one of these. We're given a lira, an Israeli dollar, you know, a good luck coin. These are the ways, the holidays that associate with the Torah, with the Bible, are very powerful in the Jewish community. I was raised American Reform, which is not religious, it's more like a Protestant. But nonetheless, this is how Zionism is taught. Next project, early efforts. Basic knitting, maybe a little more than basic, right? If those of us who knit know, these are just cables. I was asked, I volunteered to do Israel-Palestine. In fact, I claimed it pretty quick, okay? How did I do it? I created something that was very specific about my politics. I put my belief in the knitting together of two peoples, two communities in one place. That's what I thought at the time. I used the technique of knitting to do it, right? And then you can see what the project coordinator sent to me at the end of it. She was ready to take apart the flag and make everybody do it again the way I did it. But that's an application of technique to carry some of the political message. My world changed when this happened. This is Operation Cast Lead. This is the end of 2008, when Israel dropped chemical bombs on Gaza. So I had already been an activist. I had already been a vocal opponent, but this event cost me my participation in the community. I simply turned around and I went into overdrive as an artist. It really catapulted me into trying to speak, because I really didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to talk to my community anymore. And so this was a pivotal event. That's what a phosphorus flare looks like. When Israel dropped American-made bombs on Gazans, civilians, that's what it does. It's a chemical that, when exposed to air, creates these smoke flares. And then the chemical, which is the payload of this missile, is not always fully spent. And so it falls on people and burns them and does other things, tremendous damage. That's what Israel dropped. That's why the UN issued the Goldstone report against Israel's use of chemical weapons. I'm about to show you art that expresses some of this. During that operation, I was apoplectic. The first thing I did, the first thing I could think of doing, was to perform opposition, perform dissent, much like Zan does with some of her work. I did it at home. Challah making for the Sabbath is a traditional woman's art. I taught it to my sons because I only have sons and I was a feminist mother. But this is baking Sabbath bread. It's actually a domestic reenactment of an ancient practice of offering. It's called the meal offering that to the priests of the ancient temple. Like a lot of traditions, it got brought into the home. Okay, so I performed it. I made some dough. I documented the entire process. I made some dough. I grabbed some giant cooking chopsticks. I knitted the dough into doves, and then I burned the whole lot in the oven. I just scorched it and created this collage, shared it widely online with friends, did whatever I could to perform a sacrifice. That's the first thing.
Leave art aside for now. Yeah. I do have a response in terms of persuasiveness or what it's going to mean for us to go forward and try to challenge this legally, for instance, which is, I really think we need to think pretty rigorously about what the law means when it says consent. We don't allow people to consent to amputation, and that's pretty uniform. It's just not, you can't consent to violence. You can't consent to be murdered. And there still are vestiges of protections for children. You can't consent to rape, assuming that you can prove rape in the law. So, and it's pretty universal. So I'm not speaking to efforts to undermine those things. I'm saying I think we ought to, at least I want to do some seriously thinking about the legal ramifications or the legal implications for this business about consent. We know the ways in which it's being manipulated to try to infiltrate areas that we want protected.
We'll go on now to our next speaker, who is Suzanne Vierling. So Suzanne Vierling is from United States of America. She comes with 25 years of leadership experience in higher education, mental health, forensic science, foster care, and child welfare, international consultation, and community organizing. She's served as university president and president of academic affairs. Her career has encompassed all levels of organizational leadership and management, including as an international health and human services organizational advisor, serving the nations of Malawi, Chile, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, Poland, Russia, Romania, Georgia, India, and the Philippines. Dr. Vierling is passionate about ending the tyranny against the female sex. And the talk today is the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and warfare on womanhood. So thank you so much, Suzanne, and over to you.
For a long time now, looking at this new economy coming in, that we are actually in, and it's the fourth industrial revolution. Obviously, this is our fourth, and warfare, because women are impacted by both. You know, we are literally going through a transformation where we are moving, you know, from the human to the post-human, as they call it, and the fourth industrial revolution has a nickname of 4IR. And it's really taking a look at how all of these technical advancements are affecting how we live, how we work, how are we managing in this digital, post-digital age. We are looking at artificial intelligence or AI, robotics, 3D printing, blockchain, and so forth. We are also being data mined. And as I'm sure you've heard, you know, folk want to get rid of TikTok, want to try and get Americans off of TikTok because that's a source of data mining, but so is Facebook, so is every time we get on our phones. This enables technology to take autonomous actions without human intervention. Never before in the history of the world have we had this experience. And of course, we've seen it in the movies, but here we are. So we're looking at a paradigm shift with a focus on the convergence of the physical, digital, and biological systems, i.e. us, merged with the digital world. Our culture literally day by day is changing, and we've already experienced the consequences of an invasion of our rights and boundaries as a culture, because that's what's happening. We're just being divided up to accommodate multiple technologies merging at the same time. Women going to have to get ready to be included in the new workforce. We're going to have to look out and pay attention to what is being phased out, what is coming in, and how women are going to be impacted. We already have women that have been impacted. It's just terrible how our news doesn't talk about it. I think it was last year, the end of last year, I even saw, not that all we can do is to be waitresses, but I saw somebody invented a robot to replace waitresses. And I thought, wow, how hard you're working on that. It's terrible. So anyway, that is going to be something that impacts us. Lately, I've been saying, why do we spend so much time answering men who question us about why we're not okay with being called cervix havers, why we're not okay with men being in the bathroom, blah, 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 bathrooms with us, blah, blah, blah. And I started to say, wow, let's take a look at the Western man who feels that all of these things are okay. And I started realizing, this is a totally separate human being. This is like a different kind of man that we're not accustomed to. So we keep asking and responding to their questions, especially some of these men with big platforms. We keep, the woman has this and the woman has that and the woman needs safety. And I'm always thinking, they know this. This is a sold out, human being who's, really abusing his male power. So here we have, I'm proud of my little Superman picture with the robot behind him. The Western man is moving into territory, dragging us with him, where he is messing around with our psychology as a people and his and our identity. I question, is this a pathway to self-destruction or, a way to eliminate humans, eliminate himself, eliminate that which is core to what has always made him so proud, known for intelligence, creativity, inventing everything, building infrastructure, establishing a law and order. Work has been crushed into all of us as something that's so important. Even some cultures, the family name is the work that people do, Daikra, and blacksmith and so forth. So proud of building things with the hands, making things go, so to speak. So the idea of abdicating his intelligence and decision-making into the cloud and machine, I question. So womanhood has always, from the beginning of time, impacted by war and shifting economies. I'm sure that there are more things, but this is what I've narrowed it down to. And I feel like where we are so blessed to even have this forum to meet with each other globally, for us to look ahead instead of being bedraggled after something, after we're impacted by one of these two things, if not both. We've already experienced a rapid, massive shift into this new world with dismantling our rights, our parental rights. Every day we wake up and we see something, we're like, oh my God, can I get a breath from what happened yesterday? It's just going like this. So I want to briefly go over, just to give a little context to what I'm talking about, Afghanistan women, the Eastern European women, American women in chattel slavery, and the West and the European witch hunts. And I have time frames here because, we're all concerned, otherwise we wouldn't be gathered here. Because when something gets institutionalized for women, it tends to go for a very long time unabated. Okay, we know that in Afghanistan, the United States invaded and occupied Afghanistan, I think, for about 20 years. And we were all happy to see, not about warfare, but to see Afghan girls and women go to school, and they appeared to be, coming up. And it made us happy. But what we didn't realize is that was something that we imposed. That's something that Western patriarchy imposed. And the day that the West left was the day that Afghan patriarchy said, okay, we're reclaiming our women back to the way we want things to be. We like to say, oh, they were cowards. No, they put their guns down and they went back and reestablished a type of patriarchal rule that those men wanted, not what we wanted. And so, we see, and we have to understand that in warfare, one man is going to tell another man, I won, and I'm going to prove it to you by what I do to your woman, even though it was something that we all looked at and thought was great, and it was, but upon leaving, the Afghan man said, okay, I'm going to come back. I'm doing what I want to do. And so, you see Afghan women ping pong between two patriarchies as a result of warfare. And I've spoken about this before. I'll try not to take so long, but we know that in the United States, 339 years of using American women to produce children, to produce labor, to be a physical person that was called a mortgage or a bond, literally loans taken off of women as a result of proven fertility. This is something that went unabated for 339 years. There was nothing stopping it until the actions of a leadership that decided to end chattel slavery. And that was a consequence of economics. You had the conquering of Africa, and also business relationships with Africa. But at the end, the conquering of Africa, and the women became the spoil of war in that type of economic shift, which was a part of the first industrial revolution. Here is another event where women paid the price after it was celebrated. Something occurred and it was celebrated, and women paid the price, and no one has looked back. It's just feminists and women saying, wait a minute now. So we had the dismantling of the Berlin Wall. I don't know if everybody's old enough to remember then President Ronald Reagan, who said, please tear down this wall. I think it was Gorbachev. Oh my gosh, I'll be in trouble if I was wrong. But the Berlin Wall came down. There was celebration. It was supposed to be wonderful and everything, but it launched the Natasha trade, and women paid the price, and women still pay the price. Since there was no planning for how it was going to go and how to care for your women while you're making such huge changes, such as that. So, this is not to say that women were not trafficked prior, but it became almost machine-like, and that these women began to be traded all over the world, in particular Western Europe. And then finally, the European witch hunts, which endured for 700 years, and women were blamed for everything with all of this, as causation for the witch hunts. Harsh weather that negatively affected farmers, so they blamed women and witchcraft for their economic struggles. Religion encroached and assumed powers over women's leadership, over women's divine feminine. I don't know if Ava or Vajra is on, but religion, took over the power of women in that way. Single women who were impoverished and worked as maids, experienced a lot of sexual harassment, and men, the head of the household, would throw them under the bus, blame them for witchcraft if things got a little shaky with what he was trying to do with the poor woman while he was married with his children. We know the slow takeover of midwifery and doula, and the majority of victims were single, impoverished women over 40. For over 700 years, of the witch hunts that went again unabated and started as in part due to economic hardships or economic changes. Here we are where, and I'm going to quote Amy Ichikawa here, I don't know if she's on, but what's happening inside women's prisons is a test run for what is in store for women in the free world. If we do not stop this, we are next, and you are not ready. And I just thought that this was just such a perfect quote here from her, because I've been just shocked, as I know I'm not the only one, all of us. How have we legally institutionalized rape and sexual assault and that type of loss of dignity right under our own eyes, right under our own nose? And, you know, I want to reiterate to us that we cannot be oblivious to the fact that rape and sexual assault is a tool of warfare, an act of warfare where one group of men conquer another. Soldiers raise the victory flag on the woman of the peoples that are conquered. The woman is the symbol. You desecrate the woman, and you are telling the community, you are telling the nation, you are telling the tribe that they are defeated, that they are conquered. It's very hard for us to see it, but this is really where we are. So warfare, you know, and I'm just going to put it out there. You know, we are in a situation where a nice chunk of us, of the Western man, is ideologically conquered. Western culture cannot be overtaken by military due to having the strongest, most powerful military, or one of the most powerful militaries. And we have been, there's been so many wars that we don't see what a threat is outside of military boots, guns, and bombs. It's hard for us to see warfare without the bullet, without the gun. So we end up missing what's right in front of us. He ends up missing what's right in front of him. We have so much chaos occurring, and it just does not cross his mind that that we could be at war, or that he could just be conquered, albeit ideologically. We have these men that are like, oh, you women, oh, it's so great that you're fighting this, or the alternative, oh, you women are, you know, you're ridiculous. You're making a big deal out of everything that's happening. There are no crimes. There are no rapes in prisons. Please, you know, blah, blah, blah. So one can be taken out without an army, very similar to the African continent that was taken out without an army. Little tiny Europe conquered an entire continent with very, very little warfare. It was ideologically. Okay, I'm not gonna go through all of this, but you're gonna have this YouTube clip when this goes up on YouTube under WDI. It's someone that I think that we should all watch, Yuri Bezmenov. He's a KGB agent that defected from then USSR in 1980, and he read the United States, the Riot Act. He told them, you know, we're in your head, we're coming in your head, and this is how you're going to be taken down, and this is how it's already started. And this is back in 1980. It's quite chilling. A demoralization stage where the society's values are completely eroded or being eroded, values stripped, and we're seeing that. Destabilization into a crisis mode where, you know, we complain, we get so upset, but laws have been established at such a high level, it's so difficult. And also there's ownership, or a conquered group of our leaders who have completely let their hands go of protecting women and children. And then it goes on from there. But you have to hear him, so you'll have access to that. It's very powerful. His predictions, it's like as if he said it. I don't know if y'all saw this on Twitter, honey, but I said the Western man has gone from this Mr. Captain America, I could save everybody. I got this. I'm king of the hill, to this guy over here. Woo! Help me. This, even though we are upset about this because he's all just taking our fertility, our sovereign role, that's our world right there. Nobody else's. That's our world. But then let's turn the mirror and reflect back on him. What is happening? Where the man could just, I mean, he's got everything from the man bun all the way down to taking out the breastfeeding, the womb, everything. It's rough. So can we go back to general patriarchy, that we could fight on known ground and territory? Can we go back to Captain America? I never thought I'd ask for that, okay? So anyway, just my reflection on that, the Dr. Karen Horney coining the term womb envy. This is my little quick analysis. Man's aching need to re-enter, possess, and dominate the woman's body simultaneously in awe, fascination, attraction, revulsion, and rage at the woman's power. And I also think it's a protective space, is hiding against the world. There's so many things happening at the same time. I think that just might not be able to handle what's happening right now, again, because it's not coming at them militaristically. And so let's go back to mama's womb. I'm trying to turn it around so that we're not always on the defense. We have the dismantling Western democracies, Anglo-Saxon patriarchy or Western patriarchy, just finding different terms, declining right before our eyes while we have a queer patriarchy, global patriarchy rising. So I feel like we're literally occupied, but we just can't see it. Internally, inside of our different systems, we have a breaking down of the infrastructure that we've taken for granted, that which has always been normal and logical, like stuff that should never ever come up for debate is now currently dismantled. Our culture is almost unrecognizable. And something else that's happening, we just keep thinking, okay, the West will always be on top. The West will always be on top. We lend in money, we printing money. We don't have printing money that's not backed up by gold. So we have these fragile banking systems and they're just crashing, and they're gonna have a beyond cataclysmic domino effect. Externally, there is a global realignment of relationships among nations that they're just doing their thing. They're like, I'm not asking the West for permission. I'm not asking America for permission, and we'll soon get to that. We're constantly in some type of war and conflict, and people are fatigued with that. We have the influence of the World Economic Forum, which is a very powerful forum, and it spreads influence on how we are to live, eat, sleep, earn money, all of that. Data mining, the whole nine is very powerful, very, very powerful. And they're, of course, tied with multinational corporations, and they're impacting our lives. And you'll see people upset about it and starting to talk about it more and more and more. It's very important. Talking about the WEF then overlaps with Kay Yang a little bit. She talks about the United Nations and different things like that. Okay, when I talk about our internal systems shattering, I just threw up some things. We could talk about this for days, all the different things that are happening, but I just wanted to point out, here is a mixed sex bathroom where the people built in over here to hear women experience using an all gender bathroom. This woman went in and she was like, I can't believe this. And she videotaped a man coming out of the same bathroom as a woman. And both of them were like, the guy was like, I didn't even know until I was deep in, this is at an airport. And the woman said, this is shocking. Of course, that's a normal response. We have what's happening in our prisons, which is just shocking. Legally sanctioned rape and sexual assault. Unbelievable. California's just lost its mind. It releases pedophiles along with hardened criminals on a regular basis. Like, let's let out people who have, they sold marijuana and they didn't realize they needed a license to do that. No, they're letting out lifers, double lifers, pedophiles, and like it's no big deal. And then here is a video, Oil of London or Oil London. He has the most, I sometimes have to say, I got to stay away from his little Twitter because it's just, he is back to back. It's so depressing. But Ollie, sorry. I gave it a fancy name, Oil of London, Ollie. This is a video that he had put up where the students were licking a clear glass. They were on the other side of each other, taking turns to run up and lick a clear and lick a glass. And male teachers standing around. I'm like, my goodness, I wish y'all had a mirror to see how far you've fallen to where you're doing this in the classroom. It's unbelievable. That's just a little snapshot, because you and I know that there's a lot of things happening all at the same time. K through 12, our criminal justice system, our rights to our spaces. So, it appears as if internally Western leadership has completely abdicated their care and concern for the safety and security and sanctity of what has been cultural norms for us forever. I don't know if any of you know, but Robert Kennedy is running for president. And I don't know if you know that we are introducing a central bank digital currency, CBDC. It's pretty significant. I think the UK and Canada and so for, and some other nations are introducing an electronic currency. It's coming in July. We haven't voted on it. It's just being imposed. We have absolutely no idea why, and is it a necessity, and what's wrong with our currency. I like my paper and my credit card, okay? I'm just getting used to the PayPal. So come on now, what's going on? There is an old saying, he who has the gold rules, he who does not have the gold loses,
Suzanne, sorry,
yes.
You've got 1 minute left, just because it's fantastic talk, but we have to move on to
okay. The Chinese yuan is taking over everybody's dollar, and I just wanted you to see this. These are the BRIC nations, and almost every nation is applying to get into BRIC: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, West Africa, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. Everybody is trying to get into, Mexico is trying to get into the BRIC alliance.
Now we're going to move on to our third speaker and final speaker, Sheila Jeffries from the UK. Sheila Jeffries writes in the area of sexual politics, international gender politics, lesbian and gay politics. She has written 18 books on the history and politics of sexuality. Originally from the UK, Sheila moved to Melbourne in 1991 to take up a position at the University of Melbourne. She retired back to the UK in 2015 and has been actively involved in feminist and lesbian feminist politics, particularly around the issue of sexual violence since 1973. She's a director of Women's Declaration International and a co-author of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. And today, I'm really pleased to say Sheila Jeffries is talking on the topic, the 8th of March Principles, 2023, a Charter of Men's Sexual Rights. Thank you so much, Sheila, and over to you.
This document that I'm talking about came out on International Women's Day last month. It's called the 8th of March Principles, in other words, the International Women's Day Principles, a Charter of Men's Sexual Rights. So you can see from the title that this document is what I will call feminist washed. In other words, it's pretending to be something to do with feminism, whereas in fact, it is absolutely nothing of the kind. It's clever and it's nasty the way that that is done. Now, the 8th of March Principles is a document planned at a 2018 meeting of UNAIDS, the UN Organization to Combat AIDS, and the Office for Human Rights, the United Nations Human Rights Organization. It was composed by the International Committee of Jurists, and it was launched in March this year on International Women's Day by UNAIDS and the OHCHR. Its origins are impressive, and they're likely to give it considerable weight in international law and politics. I will argue that it constitutes a charter of men's sexual rights. It's a document which is aimed at removing, or so it says, certain activities relating to sexuality and reproduction, and puzzlingly, poverty and homelessness, as impossible to understand how that got in really, from the purview of the criminal law. So it's very various. The document begins with two principles related to the freedom of women to control their own reproduction, which are relevant to its launch on International Women's Day. So this practice I call feminist washing. It resembles what's called greenwashing, in which the corporations that are destroying life on Earth engage in publicity and some minor activities to promote an environmentally friendly agenda when it's actually the opposite of what they're doing. But at the heart of the document are principles which are very much at odds with the interests of women. They relate to a variety of forms of men's sexual practice, and particularly gay men's sexual practice, such as using women and girls, men and boys in prostitution, using children for sex, and protecting all forms of supposedly consensual sexual practice from criminalization. This protection of consensual sex does not, as the document stands, have any limits. In fact, all the principles are extremely vague, and they could put under them just about anything they wanted. As it stands, it can include practices such as strangulation and amputation and all the diverse forms of BDSM, for instance, and I'll talk about that later on. It is, in the main, a sexual libertarian document aimed at promoting and protecting the sexual freedom of men to engage in their favored sexual pursuits. Women have never campaigned for sexual freedom, i.e. the right to use other categories of persons as objects in the expression of their excitements. What women have argued for is protection from men's sexual freedom in the form of sexual violence and exploitation, something which is in complete contradiction to several of the principles here. Men demand freedom to engage in or inflict whatever sexual practices they wish upon the less powerful, upon women and children in their sexual rights agendas. Women, on the other hand, require freedom from having these practices carried out on them. So men demand freedom to. Women try to get freedom from. There is nothing in this document about protecting women from rape, sexual coercion, sexual harassment. These are all practices which restrict or deny the exercise of women's rights as human rights. They're not mentioned here. And that should make it immediately clear that this is a document that promotes men's freedom to aggress against women and boys, and with no consideration about how men's sexual violence limits and often ends women's lives. The document was in fact written by a woman called Ali Journo, director of the Social Justice Program at the Arcus Foundation, an organization to promote LGBT rights founded by John Stryker, who is still its president. Stryker, as Jennifer Bilek's work has shown, is the billionaire philanthropist whose money came from a medical supplies company. He is arguably the most significant funder and promoter of gender ideology today through many organizations and initiatives. The Stryker Corporation is likely to gain from the medical scandal that is the physical and pharmaceutical mutilation of healthy children and adults in the name of transgenderism. And of course, that is one of the principles of this document. I want to say something about UNAIDS. It's useful to consider the interests that UNAIDS, which is one of the sponsors of the principles, represents. UNAIDS has always been dominated by and dedicated to the interests of gay men, who were the first community to be seen as greatly affected by the disease. UNAIDS says it's concerned with a number of constituencies, the first of which is gay men and men who have sex with men, and others include what they call sex workers, and we would call prostituted women, and drug users. UNAIDS, under the influence of the gay men who played a key role in the organization, always promoted the decriminalization of prostitution. The feminist understanding that the prostitution of women is a form of men's violence and should be abolished has never played any part in the organization's thinking. UNAIDS has always argued that decriminalizing prostitution, i.e. promoting a global sex industry, is vital to combating AIDS. The decriminalization and the promotion of the sex industry is one of the principles in the document. It's interesting to note that the executive director of UNAIDS, Michael CEDAW, stood down in 2019 after an investigation into sexual harassment at the organization under his watch. As it was reported in the press at the time, an independent body has found overwhelming evidence that organizational culture at the United Nations HIV body, UNAIDS, allowed for abuses of power, bullying, and sexual harassment. One official, who apparently had ties to senior management at the UN body's Geneva Secretariat, is quoted as saying, UNAIDS mirrors the whole UN as a boys' club, with hierarchical and patriarchal culture of discrimination, lack of transparency and accountability that enables harassment. And at the time of the meeting at which this document was planned in 2018, CEDAW was the director of what has been called in the media at that time a boys' club. I think it's fairly clear from the 8th of March principles that they emanated from and represent the interests of an organ of male domination. The foreword to the principles is by Edwin Cameron, who is described in the information I found about him as a proudly gay man who is a retired judge from South Africa. He was hailed by Nelson Mandela as a hero for his gay activist work. Most importantly, he has always campaigned for the full decriminalization of prostitution. And in that way, he can be seen as a staunch opponent of the feminist campaign, the international feminist campaign, to abolish this form of male violence against women. Now, there is a bit of a history to the 8th of March principles. They are not without precedent. The 8th of March principles was preceded by the Yogyakarta principles, promulgated in 2007, with a follow-up set of demands in 2010. I see them as demands. I think it's better to call them demands, probably. The Yogyakarta principles purported to be about gay rights, but the rights of transvestites were attached umbilically to gay rights in the document. It contained demands for transvestites to be able to legally self-identify as women, and to something called gender expression, i.e. cross-dressing in public, and for the right of transvestites to be accepted as if they had changed sex and were women and should enter all women's spaces. The sellotaping of transvestite rights onto gay rights as a tactic has been very successful. The Yogyakarta principles have been cited by many governments and organizations as influencing their policies of protecting men's fantasy identities and undermining women's sex-based rights. Though they do not have the force of law, they have had a moral force, which has been very dangerous to women's interests. And that's why it's really important to take seriously and think about the 8th of March principles at this time. At the UN level, the tactic of attaching the rights of heterosexual male fetishists to cross-dress for sexual purposes to gay rights is now done under the use of the term called SOGIES, S-O-G-I-E-S, i.e. sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. That is used everywhere as if there was a connection. In fact, of course, gay rights are now rarely mentioned without this sort of Frankenstein companion of transvestite rights. And the sellotaping of transvestite rights to gay rights has caused many people who seek to be progressive to assume that transvestite rights are something to do with homosexuality and must be supported. In fact, the Yogyakarta principles form part of a project of protecting the sexual perversions of men, such as the masochistic excitements of dressing as and forcing themselves into the intimate spaces of the underclass of women, in international law and in national legislatures. And in very many countries, as we know, this has succeeded in relation to transvestism, and men have the right to declare themselves to be women and roll back and overthrow women's sex-based rights. In my most recent book, Penile Imperialism, the Male Sex Right and Women's Subordination, I explained that there have been great efforts since the sexual revolution of the 90s, 60s, and 70s by men to normalize a range of what were previously understood as men's sexual perversions, so that men may engage in these sexual practices openly or even with social approval. The practices I covered included paedophilia, sadomasochism, and transvestism, and the prostitution abuse of women. All of them are central to the 8th March principles. So I kind of see my book as coming true, really, in this document. The 8th of March principles are an excellent example of how far the normalization of men's sexual perversions and of the promotion and protection of the male sex rights have forced their way into the very center of international male domination. The 8th of March principles, however, go much further than the Yogyakarta principles towards the promotion and protection of men's sexual rights. I shall now go through the principles, and look at what they cover. I shall show that the implications of these often rather vague statements for women's sex-based rights and the rights of children are very worrying indeed. Before this, it's all general stuff that don't actually cover anything substantive. This is the first substantive principle. It's the first to actually specify an area in need of protection. And because, of course, it's International Women's Day that it was launched on, it covers sexual and reproductive health and rights. And as we can see here, it says that the criminal law may not in any way impair the right to make and act on decisions about one's own body, sexuality and reproduction, such as pregnancy, contraception, including emergency contraception, comprehensive abortion care, prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infections. But added on the end, and you can see this popped on, is gender-affirming care and therapy. That's cleverly popped into something which otherwise is very important for women and which we could all see as relevant to women's interests. But they just popped in gender-affirming care and therapy on the end of that. So they kind of removed that one. And yes, these principles generally can cover all sorts of things because they're so vague that could be very worrying. For instance, there is a problem in the fact that in the rest of the document, it does comment that there may be many activities not specifically mentioned in any of the principles which should come under their general object of opposing criminalization. And you will not be surprised to learn that one of these is what they call non-exploitative surrogacy. In other words, the slave trade, in which women are put into a form of reproductive slavery so their babies can be bought and exchanged around the world. And all surrogacy entails placing women in this reproductive slavery, and the effects on the women and children are, of course, very harmful. There isn't a nice and cuddly kind. But surrogacy is important to gay men who have been at the center of creating an international industry through which these men can acquire children without having to relate to women. This is very straightforward. Criminal law may not proscribe abortion, and that seems entirely reasonable. So there is at least, I think, one principle here that doesn't have any problematic aspects and is fairly straightforward. This is a worrying one. Principle 16, consensual sexual conduct. Now, this is the beginning of the document, which is fairly clear about being about a men's charter of sexual rights. And this seeks to remove any form of sexual practice which can be justified with the idea of consent from the remit of the criminal law. I'll read this one out. It says consensual sexual conduct, irrespective of the type of sexual activity, the sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression of the people involved or their marital status may not be criminalized in any circumstances. Now, the problem about this, of course, is that there are many forms of sexual practice justified by consent, which are very problematic. As long as this refers simply to the removal of homosexuality from the criminal law, that's fine. That's a very important principle, because, of course, there are many countries in which lesbians and gay men face serious penalties as a result of who they love right now. But there are a number of problems. One is that there are definitely some kinds of sexual practice which can be defended by consent, which would face the sanction of the criminal law. Another is the fact that consent can be and is used to justify adult men sexually using children. As I argue in Penal Imperialism, consent is not useful as a way of distinguishing abusive and non-violent sex from that which is a wanted activity. For instance, a woman can be seen to consent or even see herself as consenting if she simply allows a man to insert his penis while she does something else, like reading a book. Men will penetrate women even when they're crying, even when they're unconscious. Such use may be experienced as abusive by women, but she may not feel able to prevent it or object because heterosexual relationships are based on a profound power imbalance. And she's been trained to think that she should allow her body to be used in the satisfaction of the male sex right. And of course, the man may be violent if she objects. So this is about, consent is really about men's right to simply use women in any way that they wish. It provides an excuse for men using women for their own satisfaction when those women would rather be somewhere else. Women, for instance, we know there's a lot of training about consent at the moment. It's called consent training in universities, in schools and so on, which is supposed to be for the interests of women. But in fact, women are not trained in schools and universities to recognize whether men have consented to their sexual use, because women do not use men simply as bodies for their pleasure. So we know what this is about. It's about the use of women's bodies by men. Nobody seems to be sort of honest about this, though. Men's harassment, it's called sexual initiative, to force women to be used is simply unquestioned. It's simply the way the world works. It's how sex happens. It's what happens. Now, men don't have to worry about whether they consented. They don't have to think, did I consent to that? Can I go to the police? Did I consent? Because it's not going to be a problem. This makes it clear that consent is simply a mechanism for enabling the abuse of women. Consent, for instance, is the main and perhaps only justification for what used to be called sadomasochism. It's now called BDSM, which is people torturing each other and inflicting psychological and physical pain. Since the 1970s, as I point out in Penal Imperialism, there's been a powerful campaign, mostly by gay men, to normalize and decriminalize sadomasochism. In the practice of sadomasochism by both gay and straight men, coercive control is normalized, and practices that may include many forms of vicious violence, beating, cutting, piercing, flaying, removal of body parts, testes in particular, are routinely carried out. The judgment made as a result of something called the Operation Spanner case in the UK would, under the principle that we've just been looking at about consent, that all consensual practices should be removed from the purview of the law, the judgment in that case, which is a very important judgment, would simply fail. It wouldn't be accepted. This was a judgment in Britain. It was a British legal principle established in 1989. There was a trial of 16 men in connection with an investigation over several years into a sadomasochism network of gay men. The main man involved in running what were called the disorderly houses in which these practices occurred was a former pig breeder. the court determined that any acts which left lasting scars were assault. It was a very, very important case. It was very important to women and their possibility of them defending themselves legally against being attacked by men. The perpetrators were found guilty of assault occasioning actual bodily harm and the victims of aiding and abetting. The men filmed their acts, and this was useful to the prosecution. The gay male sadomasochism BDSM networks in the UK at this time are dealt with under criminal law because of this judgment. This month, for instance, a trial is taking place at the Old Bailey in London, in which a number of men are charged with grievous bodily harm and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm related to extreme body modification practiced upon other men. The acts were filmed, uploaded to a website, which could be accessed on a pay-per-view basis. So men were able to pay some money in order to look at men having organs removed. The acts involved removal of nipples, removal of testes, removal of penises to create nullos, a well-known practice in gay sadomasochism, in which men seek to make themselves smooth, as they call it. They include the clamping of testicles, they include, too, the freezing of a leg, such that so much damage was done that the victim could go to hospital and get his leg surgically removed. I mean, this practice has been going on for a very long time. Sometimes men do things such as lie on railway lines when a train is coming to remove legs. And in fact, in about 2001, a doctor in Scotland in an NHS hospital did remove 2 legs from men who wanted them removed, but he was stopped at that point and told that he shouldn't remove any more legs. So according to this principle, which is all about consent, all of these practices could potentially have a protection. Now, women are seriously imperiled by the demands of gay male sadomasochist practitioners to be allowed to do violence in the name of sex. The normalization of sadomasochism has led to the introduction of practices of vicious violence into ordinary heterosex, such as strangulation and suffocation. Strangulation and suffocation have extremely serious effects on women's health, with the possibility of lifelong brain injury. Men who engage in this practice argue that the women consent. In the UK, in 2022, that is last year, a new law was introduced which penalizes non-fatal strangulation or suffocation. This law, I think, would fall foul of Principle 16. Now, I need to talk about child sexual abuse, which has been the most controversial aspect of this set of principles. It purports to be about the right of young people under 18 to engage in sex without punishment. Let's see what it says. It says, moreover, sexual conduct involving persons below the domestically prescribed minimum age of consent to sex may be consensual, in fact, if not in law. Well, a basic principle is that no, it can't be consensual because these young people do not have the same kinds of power and so on. So it's just, the law actually understands that they cannot give consent, but this principle says they can. In this context, the enforcement of criminal law should reflect the rights and capacity of persons under 18 years of age to make decisions about engaging in consensual sexual conduct and their right to be heard in matters concerning them. Pursuant to their evolving capacities and progressive autonomy, persons under 18 years of age should participate in decisions affecting them with due regard to their age, maturity, and best interests, and with specific attention to non-discrimination guarantees. Now, it's interesting to note that gay men who desire to have legal sexual access to children have always campaigned for this under the banner of children's sexual rights rather than their own interests, in order to sound socially progressive rather than predatory. This was the case in the 1970s in the UK, when a campaign by many gay men to remove the age of consent so that they could use children reached considerable political acceptance, particularly what was then the National Council for Civil Liberties and is now Liberty. These men wanted to abolish the age of consent or perhaps lower it to 4. Feminists, including me, fought these men and we were successful. But the campaign didn't go away. and it's been ramping up again. And Principle 16 shows how successful it has been. The International Committee of Jurists took 5 years to compose their principles, but somehow failed to notice that this principle about the sexual rights of children could lead some people to think that they were enabling child sexual abuse. There was an immediate outcry, and they were forced to clarify what they are and are not demanding. They put up, they did a few days ago, make an apology, and they say, the commitment of the United Nations to fighting the sexual exploitation of children and the content of the 8th March Principles have subsequently been seriously misrepresented on a number of social media and websites. So that may be what I'm doing with you today, except that I am in touch with the 50-year history of men demanding, under the name of children's rights, their sexual access to children. The 8th March Principles do not call for the decriminalization of sex with children, nor do they call for the abolition of a domestically prescribed minimum age of consent to sex. However, they disagree with it. So what's so extraordinary is that within a month of producing this document, they have to apologize because it hadn't occurred to them what it was actually about. Somebody's saying in the chat that the principle is in regard to parties being under 18. That may be true, but generally it is actually talking about the age of the consent being not relevant to whether the children consent. Sex work. Principle 17 requires the decriminalization of prostitution. The use of the term sex work here demonstrates the politics that it represents. Language is important, and feminists involved in opposing this form of male violence do not seek to normalize this abusive practice by pretending it's just an ordinary form of work. So you can see from the title that there's a problem. It says the exchange of sexual services between consenting adults for money, goods or services, and communication with another about, advertising an offer for, or sharing premises with another for the purpose of exchanging sexual services, etc., may not be criminalized. Criminal law may not prescribe the conduct of third parties who directly or indirectly, etc. So what it does is throw into question the laws that many countries have actually passed, criminalizing the purchase of women for prostitution and to get rid of the sex trade. It would, for instance, make laws which forbid brothel keeping and pimping unacceptable. So the principle is very much of a problem for all of the feminist work trying to stop the prostitution of women. And I think I don't have enough time to go through it in detail. I don't think I need to. I suspect that women here are very much aware of why prostitution needs to be abolished. All of the damage to women and women's life chances, to women's health, the trauma that women have suffered, and the way that prostitution actually prevents the liberation of women and the freedom of women, because it makes women into objects that can be bought. It creates a model of sexuality which is enormously damaging to women and prevents really the possibility of women's freedom. So this principle is very much against feminist interests. Then there is a principle 18. Now this is the gender expression, gender identity one. No one may be held criminal liable for conduct or status based on their gender identity or gender expression. That's very odd, actually. I mean, what could it mean? I mean, when you start looking at these things, they could cover all kinds of things. This includes gender identities and forms of gender expression that are perceived not to conform to societal expectations or norms relating to gender roles, the sex assigned, etc. Practices aiming to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation, gender identity or gender expression. So that's about this conversion therapy stuff. Carried out without the person's free and informed consent, etc., etc., etc. So it's a fairly general statement, which makes transgenderism, transvestism acceptable. I need to stop. So the 8th of March Principles, once the feminist washing is removed, can be seen to represent men's sexual rights charter. It's about enabling men's sexual freedom and sexual access to women and children. A document about women's sexual rights would be the very opposite of what's presented here. Women and children need freedom from, not freedom to. We need freedom from sexual violence and sexual exploitation or from the harassment of men. We need freedom from being the objects or unwilling audience of any number of men's sexual predilections. These principles are about men's sexual freedom, to use women and children, whereas women want freedom from such violence. Just to clarify, somebody said in the chat that this principle was supposed to be about people under the age of 18 having sex with each other, but it doesn't say that. It says involving someone under the age of 18, so it could be an adult and a child. And of course, all of the principles are as vague as possible, so that anything that the men want to put in, like putting in surrogacy and so on, they will be able to do down the track. If they really wanted to say something very specific, believe me, in 5 years, they could have said this very specific thing in every case. That's all I need to say, really. Thanks.